Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ahmed Al-Husseini. I'm an apps developer with the professional services team. And this is Ryan Watkins. He's a UI UX engineer, also with professional services. We've both been with Esri since 2016, so we've been here for some time. Today we're going to mostly talk to you about getting your React apps started, bootstrapping them with a really cool bootstrapper application. We're hoping you'll think so. And basically what we want to do is provide you with real-life examples of React applications that we've built for Esri and inside of Esri and the kinds of applications that are possible with it. Also, we want to highlight the important libraries that we use, such as Redux and Redux-Saga, and I know you guys are also Redux-Saga, and that's basically going to be a very important part of this session. And we want to show you how to get started with that bootstrapper. And then we're going to have some room for Q&A at the end. And hopefully we're going to answer all of your questions. All right, so Ryan's going to take over a little bit, talk about the different kinds of libraries that are in use. So go ahead.
Yep. Can you guys hear me? So I'm gonna walk through sort of what we chose as our set of libraries. And I kind of separated them into sort of a standard set, kind of the ones that you need to get the job done, and then an optional set, something that you can kind of switch out with your flavor of things, or even forego altogether if that's what you choose. It kind of happens that the standard set is really where all the logic happens. And the optional set is more of like UI creation, which is sort of like my wheelhouse. So if we just jump in it, we're talking about React apps, so obviously we're going to need the React.js library. But in particular, with the Bootstrap application that we've been using to jump off our work here in professional services, we're using Create React App, made by the same people who make React.js. And it's just a good way, a really quick way to get started with React applications, because there is some boilerplate involved with that, with Webpack and everything, and this kind of like takes away that Webpack need. You can eject if you need to mess with Webpack, but if not, then Create React has you covered. But since we're in React, we're dealing with sort of React caveats. One in particular is sort of its data down, events up, I believe it is. So if we think about React components and their nested nature, we can visualize them as like a tree with the root app up top, or the root component up top. And data flows down pretty easily through this tree, because that's what React's kind of built to do. But getting the data to flow back up or even sideways to other components, other child components, is kind of a pain and tedious at best. So we bring in Redux to help us with that, and we get this global store object where we can put pieces of our data from the components, or put pieces of state into this global store, and we can connect our components to that and grab out whatever we need basically from that store. This ends up being really useful in the Bootstrap application that we're going to show later, because we can store configuration data, we can store map data, we can store user authentication data, and then it's just accessible to whatever component connects to that store. A companion library to Redux is Redux-Saga, or I think people are used to Redux-Thunk if you know anything about Redux. They basically do the same thing, but Redux-Saga kind of looks nicer, I guess. So it's using those fancy decorator functions, or not generator functions, sorry, to do the job. But basically, if we need to make a network request that goes through the store. Then we can pass that over to Redux-Saga. It'll make the request, and then it'll wait for the response, and then it'll update the store, and then subsequently the component accordingly. And then of course, we got the Esri loader. This is how we're going to get the JavaScript API into our React app. We're not in Dojo, so we need a way to load in those JavaScript API modules, and this is how we do it. I'm going to have all these links on like one master link on the GitHub of the Bootstrap, by the way, so you don't need to worry about finding those. Got you covered. That's pretty much it for the standard set. These are kind of the things that we found time and time again are really needed. Obviously, React and the Esri loader are needed, but Redux has really proven itself as something that is super useful. And I honestly haven't worked on a React application that didn't use Redux yet. As far as our optional set goes, these are the more UI creative type things. Style components is a CSS and JavaScript library, and it's pretty much become my favorite way of creating UI lately. So it's pretty cool. We'll take a look at it also in the Bootstrap application, but it's in there just because it's pretty neat. Accompanying that is the Calcite React component library. Happens to be built on style components. It's sort of like a Bootstrap CSS library. You have a bunch of components that you can choose from and plug in there with the Calcite React web standard, or the Calcite web standard. And yeah, it just makes building applications a lot easier when you have all those components ready to go and plug in. And so now I'm gonna go ahead and switch it back to Ahmed over here, and he's gonna kind of walk you through how some of this stuff gets used in conjunction in like real world applications and whatnot.
All right, so
yeah, you want me to switch you over?
Yes, please. All right, so most of these applications, except where I'm going to tell you, are applications that Ryan and I have worked on together. And the very first one that we're looking at here is the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi. Basically needed an application to display specific information coming from either buoys or, well, they're all from buoys, except they also sometimes calculate indices to reflect the marine water quality in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. And so, they needed an informational dashboard to display that. And one challenge with the data was that the calculation method for the indices is proprietary, and that, they didn't want to necessarily share that in the code itself. So they are going, well, they are actually not just going to, but what they do is that they calculate these indices, and they're capable of switching those as a JSON file right into the application itself. And then the application reads that JSON file, associates it with the stations, and displays this information. So the buoy feeds here represents live feeds, and as you can see, we can just select different attributes that they want to show, like blue algae, chlorophyll, oxygen, things like that. And also they could see all the different stations on the map, and they're able to even see, how it compares to the previous measurement. So that's one for the live feeds, and then for the indices, they're also capable of seeing the different indices, seeing the average score for specific categorical areas. And then they're also able to see the scores for each individual station and how they compare to the previous score. Okay. Now, right now, you'll see that I'm viewing the data for December 2015, and that's old. But that's because, that was the data, the JSON file data that was shared with us. But as we mentioned, they're capable of just hot swapping in a different data file, and the application would just associate that right away. And one of the cool features that they also wanted was that they wanted to be able to visualize how that changed over time. And then not only how it changed over time, but they wanted to sort of time travel across that. So, they wanted to be able to see how all of them changed over time, and they could just play through. So that was one thing that we accommodated for them. And when it came to particularly to how we built this with React, everything you're seeing here is its own component. So this little card is a single card component. This one, for example, was a double card component, etc. All right. And what's cool about this is with Redux, the application date is shared globally. So it's, that's how the chart knows which data to be reading at the same time that the cards know which data to be reading, which time, etc. Now, for this application, the American University in Cairo wanted to be able to visualize their campus, and they wanted to set something up. Now, I'm not a UI guy. Brian is. And I was able to put this together really quickly just because of the template and the bootstrapper that we already had. Now, I couldn't rope him into it because this is, this wasn't an official project, right? This was just something for my alma mater. But basically, building something like this was very, very quick, very, very easy. All I had to worry about was, the actual application business logic itself. And then otherwise, all of the UI was already there, and I could just get started right away. Okay. And the cool thing is that this is also 100% responsive. So, no matter what kind of screen you're seeing it on, it's going to be working perfectly. Now, another app Ryan and I have both worked on together was for the Abu Dhabi Department of Transportation. And what they wanted to do was they actually wanted to see two views for information about incidents. The first one was that they wanted a real-time view of what's going on in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. And with that, they wanted to see, the kinds of accidents that are going on. And because it's 5 a.m. in Abu Dhabi right now, there are no accidents, so that's a good thing. The kinds of roadwork projects, the road projects that are currently ongoing, and also the current road closures. And just selecting one of those, you could see the nearest speed to that specific incident, which kind of street it was on, and the starting date, etc. You could sort differently. These were all things that can very easily be done. In addition to that, they also wanted a historical view that represents the entire last week of information. And they wanted to be able to aggregate and visualize the kinds of accidents that are caused by biking, motorcycle, or auto accidents all over the Emirate. And then, they also wanted the time traveling capability that the marine water quality guys had. So they wanted to copy that over, and that was something that we could incorporate. And again, what's really impressive about these apps is just how quickly we can make them, just how quickly we can build them, because of the kinds of support that are coming from the React library itself, the Bootstrapper that we've built, this concept of sharing data across with Redux. And then specifically with this application, the capability to wrap all of this in an asynchronous way that we could then handle when the actions were complete. So that was something that was also very interesting specifically to this project, but that has been incorporated into the Bootstrapper, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, that's these are the kinds of applications that you could build in real life with these kinds of things. And then I'm going to switch over to Ryan, and he's going to talk to us about the Bootstrapper.
Yeah, so we're kind of flying through this, so I might just end up spending a bunch of time exploring the code of this with you guys. First and foremost, this is the GitHub you can find the code at. It's open source, so feel free to fork it or clone it and go nuts. Or you can search Esri React Boot. I'm going to have this link back up, but there's a bunch of links on the GitHub for all those libraries I was talking about. Actually, I'll jump over to it real quick. So this is it, yeah. And all those links are just right here. And you have all your information about installing and get it running. Oh, you're not looking at what I'm looking at. I thought it was going to work out better than that. Okay, so this is it. Yeah, so here's all those links. It's right on the first page. You can just give this an explore. It's pretty easy to get up and running and everything. You just need npm, but licensing info, all that good stuff. And then in the wiki tab, there's some extended documentation on it, a few pages in there. So you can give that a check out afterwards. Let's switch back. So sort of the offering for this is it comes built on Create React App. Again, that kind of gets us away from the Webpack stuff and having to deal with that configuration. It just makes getting started with a React app quite a bit simpler. And then there's always you can always eject from Create React App and mess with all that Webpack goodness if you feel so inclined. But other than that, I mean, Create React App comes with its own like build and run scripts and stuff like that. So that's what kind of makes it simple and easy to get started. We've built into this Bootstrap application methods for configuration. So there's a global configuration JSON file that you can throw a bunch of JSON data in. Like your portal URL, like feature URL, stuff like that, that any component can call to as soon as the app starts up. A big one for us is authentication. We're constantly having to authenticate prior to like the app running, so we need authentication on startup. And so I'm just including that just because it makes my life easier. So I imagine it makes somebody else's life easier to have it at the ready. You can also just completely ignore it. So you don't need to authenticate to use the application if you turn it off. And then I get the big ones would be the map and scene components, which is actually just one map component that's kind of polymorphic and can, with some adjustment to properties, can become either a web map, a web scene, a scene view, all that good stuff. Before I dive into the code, just a quick high-level overview of what's happening on startup here. You're entering in on that root component, the app component, which is set up. That's Create React thing, gives you that app component to jump into. And two things are happening right off the bat. You're running through a side effect chain to grab your configuration file and to set up this class that kind of floats out in the global space called an auth manager, authentication manager, and it's gonna start up the JavaScript API with the modules it needs to run authentication, and that's so that it can authenticate before the rest of the app loads if you need to gate your application. If not, it'll just pass through and you won't need anything there. So the user could be authenticated or could not be authenticated. It's up to you. And that's based on a config property. And then it's going to pass all that stuff to the store and pass it back out to the app component. Where the app component's going to be looking for that config file and that user info. If it doesn't get it, it's going to show you a load screen. I'll show you that in a minute. And if it does get it, it's going to drop into the main component, which is like your secondary root component, if you will. Pretty much all components are going to branch off of that main component. And now I know I have to end this so you can see stuff. So it feels crazy zoomed to me. Let's see how decent this looks. I can zoom out a little bit. Oh yeah. Okay, so this is the app on load. It's just pretty much like an npm install and then an npm start. I'm not going to do that stuff because it kind of takes a while. But you get this cool little screen that says everything's good and you have your local server running localhost 3000. Right off the bat, we have a web scene loading with a bunch of layers loading and a layer list that's does all sorts of zooming and showing you stuff. This might look familiar to some if you're intimate with the JavaScript docs. It's just an example off of that. I just took this chunk of code and I imported it into a React app basically to make it work. So it's not anything super special or complicated, but it does. You do need to make some adjustments. Also up here at the top, this nice little header. This is the Calcite React header. It's pretty much straight out of the box. It only needs a little bit of finesse to get it in here. We can do that through style components, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we have our authentication. So I'm not authenticating when we load the app or anything. Oh, geez. I guess I am going to show you what it's like to start it. I don't know how I canceled that. So yeah, see, it takes a minute. That's why I was trying to avoid it. Starting the server, okay. Yeah, so we had our load screen. It didn't take very long to load anything up because we're not really making too many network requests. It'll take a little bit longer after authentication, but we have our authentication method, so we can sign into our portal or online. Took just a little bit longer, and then also part of Calcite React, we get this cool user badge with a user dropdown and all this cool information and stuff. It's got my name and everything. So that's pretty neat. I'm going to sign out actually because I got other stuff that I want to show. And so we can go ahead and take a look at this in the code. I'm going to focus primarily on the configuration and the main component and the map component, because that's where the bulk of the work is going to happen. Can you guys see that all right? Is that okay? Yeah. So right off the bat, this is the main component. There's quite a bit going on in here. Right up top, we're importing a bunch of stuff for React, Redux right here, and all our components that we're using, they're either custom components or they're coming from Calcite React. And then down here we have our style components. I just threw them in the file for simplicity, but you can always pull them off into their own JavaScript file, JSX file, whatever you need, if you don't want your files to get too bloated and stuff. For those of you who haven't seen style components, it's just a variable using the styled function, and then we're setting it to a div element, which is considered a style component primitive. And we throw it in a template literal. So it's just straight CSS and a template tied to this container variable. And then we can take a look at what that looks like when we drop down to our render function, and we just pop it in there like we would HTML or whatever. This is just how components look in React. And then we have that header. This is what the header looks like with all those components nested in one another. And down here in the map wrapper, I have this. It's the scene view example. It's pretty much what you see on screen when you start the application, but it's just a copy of the map component. I just wanted to have this copy, which is an example of what can be done with it. It's got a bunch of code into it to get the scene drawn and everything. And then there's the actual map component, which is the clean component. It doesn't have anything in it. So if we take a look at that, just clean state map component, I'm going to run back up here because I have to import it. And I won't need to import this. And so it takes a few properties. On map loaded is just a function to pass in. This may not be needed in future releases, but for now, you can just pass in a function of what you want to happen when the map gets loaded. And this kind of runs through Redux and that global store. Then we have the configuration, the map configuration that we're pulling from the global configuration file. It's coming in as properties because we've mapped the properties. We've mapped the properties from the store into this component. And so the actual config is named map config. I'll just jump over to the config file so we can look at that. This is an example config file. Not all the fields are getting used in the Bootstrap application, but but yeah, you can. This is kind of how it's set up and everything. What we're after right here is this map config, and so it's just got some basic map setup. And then the last one is 3D scene. So we're basically looking on whether you want to deliver this as a 3D scene or a 2D map, and we set it to false, but you can omit it completely if you want to do a 2D map. It'll just default to false. So if I save that and I run it, I close my window. Here's the map with that config. It places us over Norway, Sweden, Finland area, and it zooms us in a bit. But we still have our header and everything. So it's pretty simple. It's nice and built in. You don't have to do too much work to get a map loaded into the React application. I was talking about how this is polymorphic and everything, so you can change some properties to get it to shift the way you need it to shift. So because there's nothing really specific to 2D, we can just change this property to make it a scene, and it's going to default to a regular 3D scene. So your most basic 3D scene is just like one property set from true to false. We can also do web maps. So if we had a web map that we needed to deliver, and not just a basic map view, scene view, we can do that through providing an ID. So if you have an item ID, it's gonna realize that you're trying to get a web map loaded. And so we can just take this web map configuration with the ID property, and we can slide that in there to deliver our web map with our baked in web map information. And then the last thing we can do is we can do a web scene. This web scene down here is special because nobody but me has access to it, so it's going to require authentication. So if I put that in there, it won't load correctly because I have to make sure that it knows it's a 3D scene. But it's gonna give me this pop-up, which isn't the greatest user experience. So we probably don't want users to get this far when we have information that is private. As you can see, the header's still loading and pieces of the map are still loading. It's just that they can't see the map and the data itself. So we're going to go ahead and gate this so that you have to authenticate before you can even get into that. And that's going to require a field called portal URL. So if we just pretty much drop this anywhere, but I'll put it underneath the app ID, and that's going to send it to the ArcGIS online account that I'm authenticating with. So if I save that, it's going to realize that I need to authenticate before I get anywhere, and it's going to give me something a little bit nicer than a pop-up, even if the graphics don't render that great. And if I sign in, I get my private web scene, and as you can see that I'm authenticated and everything. So that is that's it on the surface level for the map, but we can go ahead and dive a little bit deeper still. If I go out to main and I just use my regular scene config for this next one. So I'm loading up a regular scene config. I'm still authenticated. I guess that doesn't matter. And we'll take a look at the actual map component itself. So right off the bat, you'll notice there's a note up top that's saying that this component's special, and we're doing special things with it. It's basically just saying that we don't want it to re-render itself based on like a state change or that Redux store change. And we go into the should component update lifecycle function for components and just return false. We don't want it to redraw while we're in the middle of doing something important with the map, like moving data around or something like that. So there's not a whole lot that's happening with like the render or anything. We're not putting a whole bunch into that. Most of the magic happens down a little bit lower under this Esri JS API tag. When the component starts up here and component didn't mount, it's going to run the startup function, which is called down here, and it's going to call out to this create view function, which is it's just like a helper utility function. And it's going to take some of those properties and it's going to figure out whether we want a 2D map or a 3D map and stuff like that if it's a web map, web scene. And so it's going to get what we need and it's going to return it to our init function, which is down here, and it's going to store the view and the map internally to the component. So we're going to have a reference to the view and the map right here in the component so we can do other stuff with it. At the end, it's going to do finish loading, which is going to call that on-map loaded function that we pass in, which you don't really need to worry about at the moment. It's kind of automagic. So it's gonna update the store saying that the map loaded, and you're going to have a variable for that. These two are going to be your workhorse functions: the setup event handlers and the setup widgets and layers, and they are down here. Setup widgets and layers does exactly what it says it does, and then the setup event handlers is stuff for like dojo events or topic, subscribe, publish, stuff like that. So I want to run through a quick example of how we can get a widget loaded, which is kind of what's happening in that initial scene. I just kind of want to give you guys a taste of how that works. So I'm going to keep it simple. We have a good amount of time. This won't take very long, but we're just gonna throw in the base map gallery widget there. Since everything's already loaded for us, we can just start pushing in widgets and doing stuff with the map. If you haven't seen it, you can open up these examples in a code soundbox, and you get to mess with it right here. But this isn't React, so we wanna put it in a React app. Right off the bat, we kind of see that they have similar structures. So load modules they're kind of getting loaded in the same way. Then it calls this function to run this stuff that we're doing with the widgets. And instead, we're loading the modules just like we would with the require. And then after it returns that promise, I believe it is, it's going to refer to them by a variable name, and you can do stuff in this arrow function right here. So if you remember, we have internal references to view and map, so we don't need to worry about loading in the map and the view because they've already been loaded for us as part of the Bootstrap. So if we just grab the base map gallery module, and then we refer to its variable, we can start doing stuff with it. Again, this example is pretty simple. It's setting up the map and the view, but we don't need to do that because we already did that and it's already been handled in config. So we just want everything pertaining to the base map gallery. So we can make adjustments to make this a little bit nicer for ES6 stuff. We don't need a global variable. We can use const here. But more importantly, we're referring to the view here. We're adding the base map gallery to the view. This view doesn't exist in this context, so we have to remember that we have an internal reference to view, a component reference to the view. And the same thing's going down here when we add it to the UI. We have that component reference. So we're going to need to make those adjustments, otherwise it's gonna fail. I think it gives an error, yeah, because view doesn't exist. So if we save that and we hop back out, we have our base map gallery loading. Pretty quick, pretty easy, pretty nice. So that's what I had pretty much planned to show. Sure. Yeah. So again, The code is on the GitHub, the Esri Rack Boot GitHub. It's got references to all that good stuff. The wiki's here. Oh, I didn't show Calcite React. I had just to show off the component library a little bit. You got this long list of components right here. And that top nav that we're using, this is what it looks like, just base. So you can grab this chunk of code, put it in there. And I kind of omitted some of the things I didn't need, like the sign up, and I switched out branding, super easy. And yeah, that's what I've got. We have a bunch of extra time, it looks like, so I think Ahmed's gonna run us through another example.
All right, so one thing we figured might be interesting was just to take you through the time traveling scenario that you just saw for the Abu Dhabi Department of Transportation thing. So I just demoed it like very quickly a few minutes ago, but let's actually kind of look into what we're seeing here. So what we're seeing is this time stepper with a play pause button, different time periods. So for morning, afternoon, evening, and night. We're seeing the areas with the least accidents and also the areas with the most accidents. And again, the users could also filter by the kind of severity of the accident and also the weather conditions when the accident happened. But we're mostly going to be focusing upon the actual time traveling. So the way it works is that, the accidents you're seeing right now are those that happened on Thursday, the 28th of February, during the morning. And then when we hit play, everything doesn't change, but it grows, right? So we're aggregating. So now we're seeing both Thursday and Friday. And as it grows, you can see it sort of moving further along that. And again, those values are changing, right? So let's go ahead and pause and just take a look at exactly what's going on in the code. So let's start off with the time stepper here. And you'll see that once we hit that play button, we have this function called playtime. Playtime basically just sets the state to the fact that it is indeed playing. And then it calls an interval, a set interval, so something that's going to be repeating. And that thing that's going to be repeating is this .timer. That's a function that we'll explore. And it's going to happen every play timeline interval that is set in the configuration file. Now this .timer, this function basically says, if it's night, then switch to morning and move on to the next day. Otherwise, just set the time period to the next time period. And also call the property of onTimeChanged with the next time period. Now, onTimeChange is actually a function that is set through the time panel, that whole large panel there, right, with the time stepper inside. So the time panel over here has the onTimeChange function, and this calls this function. Now, over here, basically you could see that what's going on is that we're calculating the date and we're just displaying that, okay? And just displaying it in the actual time panel itself and setting the state with it, and then also setting the filter with this new date. Now what happens on the map side is that we're actually listening to this filter. So we're checking, what is the value of the filter. So I wanted to show you that right there. Yep. And so see, we have this action type that is set filter, and basically just sets the filter. Now on the actual map view, let's take a look at the map over here. When filter is set, we want to go ahead and call a function for the map view called webMapSetFilter. Now, webMapSetFilter, oops. Sorry, give me just 1 second. Yeah. So it's inside the ArcGIS map view itself, and this set filter, the map view, And what filter does is that it sets the filter as a variable for the map view itself, and then calls the display features function. Now the display features actually goes ahead, checks that the layers are already loaded, that they're there, and then after they're already loaded, it goes through the time periods that are available, and it starts going through the actual filtration of the features. So as you can see here, we have this filtering for the actual map, and then the filtering for the functions themselves. And so you can see we have date check, time check, severity check, and weather check. And one way that we could say, if there is no value that is being applied, then it's just true. So that's one thing that we're doing here. Let severity check equals true. And if filter.severity is not equals to -1, then go ahead and actually, consider that. Okay? And then after that, we're just simply going through setting the symbol. So we're setting a symbol for the actual, black circle representing the district itself, and then the actual text symbol for the number. And then we are creating the bicycle accidents, the motor accidents, and the other accidents, the auto accidents symbols. And those symbols are actually transparent circles with the width changing based on the value of, the width of the outline changing based on the value of the accident count. And the main reason we're doing that is because I want to try to zoom in here and show you one of these. Yeah, so for example, this one, that's the visualization style that they were going for. They wanted to see, how many biking accidents were there, and then also surrounding that is the number of other accidents. And the width of each line represents that. So this doesn't necessarily mean that, the number of auto accidents is larger than biking accidents, but rather that they're the same. And that was the visualization style that the client had specifically asked for. All right, so hopefully that was helpful. And I think, we have time for questions now. So.
Yeah, we'll end a little bit early. We kind of blazed through that. But yeah, we'll just open it up to questions if anybody has any. And then there's that link for the GitHub thing. Feel free to go and open up issues if you think there's missing documentation or there's features that you'd like to see, stuff like that. You could help us out by making this a little bit better, just by raising an issue and telling us what's up.
Yeah, and we seriously welcome those. So we want to make this repo, really, really good, and we need your help to do that. So, yes.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I personally have not built in that use case, but I'm not sure if it's capable of it with the information that I fed into it. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up. But raise an issue, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So because we're being recorded, the question was, can you use things like enterprise single sign-on? And like Ryan said, we haven't implemented that, so we'll check and get back to you. Yeah. Any other questions?
So some of the other React sessions compile the app to the AMD module, and then that you guys are doing it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you guys choose your approach? Why are they doing that?
So that compiled AMD module, that had to do with Webpack, right?
Yeah, it seems like so it's for Dojo.
Mm-hmm.
So they use a Dojo file, and then they compile the Dojo and the React together in the AMD module, and then Dojo will then.
I see. Yeah, I'm actually not familiar with that technique. This has kind of been like the historic way to do it. The Esri loader has been around for a while. And so it's just an easy way for anybody to kind of pick it up and plug it in and go with it. So that's why we're using it, just because we know it works. But yeah, I'm going to have to figure out who is doing it the way you're talking about.
It was Renee, I don't know.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Also, you guys, there's no limits on the Esri loader. These all the ArcGIS functionalities.
As far as I know, it's just
And there are no limits. Basically, anything that can be loaded through Dojo can be loaded through the loader.
So yeah, any part of the API, you're just loading it. You're basically loading in what you need from the JavaScript API.
Yeah.
Anything else? No? Well, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and we hope that was useful.
Enjoy the party.